Welcome to Unite Now, where we bring unity to you, wherever you are.
Hello, everyone. I'm Paivi. I lead the performance advertising team in Americas at Unity. I will be joined here today by Jaakko Virtanen, a senior data scientist at Unity, to talk about post-install optimizations. When it comes to user acquisition, the buying method is usually on early metrics of the user flow, right? Impression, install buy, and so on. Yet ultimately, you are going to want to bring the right users into your game who will stay in your game. They enjoy the game, they have skill growth, and they continuously bring more value into your game. Now, this means focusing on the post-install metrics. And most large-scale platforms such as Unity need to do this automatically, which leads us to the conversation today. I will be having a conversation with Jaakko here, who is the physics PhD and has worked on Unity's data science team for the past 4 years. He's based out in Helsinki, and he has helped develop the whole machine learning algorithm in the back end to where it is today with Unity. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to go over topics to understand what the algorithmic model does, how do we make best use of all we know about the gamers, and how is this actually relevant to advertisers or UA managers?
Yeah, thanks, Paivi. If I think back to the time when I joined Unity and where we are today, I think one of the biggest changes that has happened since then is the emphasis that we put on the individual user and their value. If I think about the UA manager, I believe that they need tools that allow them to target users who are actually interested in their particular game. And they need to know, the UA managers need to know that the price that they pay for the install is, it reflects the value that the individual user is bringing to their game. So that's where the machine learning models come into play.
Okay, very good. That's what we need to get into then. So let's do it. So I'm gonna go ask you some questions. I'm gonna ask you some questions to understand just the whole logic behind it all. So why don't we start with what models do we use?
Yeah, thanks, Paivi. That's a great question. So in kind of technical terms, our ad delivery is built around neural networks or neural network models that are powered by Google's TensorFlow machine learning platform. But that doesn't necessarily tell a lot of people anything concrete. So in more concrete terms, whenever you see a Unity ad on your mobile device, what happened is that our backend went through hundreds of games, thousands of ad campaigns, and it was looking at three things. First of all, how likely you are to install the game based on the ad campaign or the ad shown. Secondly, how likely you are to retain in that game. And thirdly, how much IAP revenue you are likely to create in the game. And then it used this information to filter and rank the campaigns to choose the best one for you.
Okay, so basically, every time a user is seen in our network and is watching an ad, we are looking at those things. And basically, to conclude, we can come up with understandings of people for three things, like who would download the game, who would stay in the game longer, and who will make a purchase, right? Okay, I want to kind of dig into this a bit more. So let's start with who will download the game, aka convert from impressions to, or watching the ad to actual install. So how are we finding those users? So, and also when it comes to the relevance of the UA manager here is they are paying for installs, and Unity needs to make sure that they find the person who actually installs. So how do we do that?
Yeah, thank you, Paivi. So you went straight to the point there. Since our campaigns work on a cost per install basis, we use rich information about the user's history, about their current context, and about the advertising campaigns to predict the install probability for each campaign and each campaign created such as a video. The bottom line from the UA manager's point of view is that we can end up choosing a high bid, low conversion campaign over a low bid, high conversion campaign, or vice versa. So that's why advertisers typically find that they can get more traffic by either increasing their CPI bids or replacing old creatives with new ones that users haven't seen before and that are novel to them.
Okay, so that is basically like this static CPI campaign where they give us a price, meaning that this is the price that we're going to charge, why we call it static, and then we're optimizing towards whoever actually like converts to the install. Do you use any information to find that user? What you assume they will do in the game later? Like, do you actually use that information? Like, oh yeah, so even though I think this person is going to download the game for sure, but how much are you using the information of them like actually staying in the game? Very likely. Do you do that at all or not really?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. So the short answer is that for these static CPI campaigns, we do not do that. And the reason is that advertisers are typically balancing a number of user acquisition KPIs. So these static CPI campaigns are most effective in the case that your main goal is to just buy as many users as you can at a given price point. So we are just optimizing towards conversion. Any post-install optimization that is needed for that is done by the advertiser manually using these kind of high-level tools. For example, adjusting the targeting on device level, blacklisting some devices, blacklisting or whitelisting certain source games or source apps, and then adjusting the CPI bid based on device type, country, and so on. On the other hand, our audience pinpointer campaigns automatically target and price users based on the predicted post-install outcomes. So they let UA managers to target users based on target users who retain well in their games or who are likely to make in-app purchases in their games.
Okay, and that you use this word audience pinpointer. So that is just like a thing that Unity uses, right? So for the post-install metrics. And just to add in here, those are also what we're going to talk about now is dynamic bids. So basically, we are going to bid differently based on users. I just wanted to put that out there. Okay.
Yeah, that's a very good addition. Thanks, Paivi.
Right. So let's dig deeper into this now. How does this work? Let's start with users who will retain in the game longer. What do you do there?
Sure, thanks, Paivi. So as a kind of motivation, I think it's taken generally as granted in the industry that user retention correlates with a whole lot of important KPIs, such as the number of your daily active users, the revenue that you get, for example, from in-game ads or other revenue sources like purchases. So to maybe simplify things a little bit, if our model thought that you, Paivi, are twice as likely to retain in game X compared to me, then our algorithm would consider you twice as valuable for that advertiser and developer of game X, and it would bid twice the CPI for your impressions compared to mine.
And you are saying that the advertiser is okay with that, to pay twice? I guess they are, because of that they want to win the bid, because like they know that this baby is more valuable in this case, and they're willing to bid higher, right?
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. That's a good addition. So basically, in our system, the higher bid you place on a user, the more likely you are to win that user. So it just bidding based on the expected retention means that you will win more traffic from the high retaining users and get better results. Okay.
And you are we're also optimizing towards only day 7 retention outcomes, not just like any day. And this is sort of something like as a universal KPI, what we've understood. So what is that? Do you think basically, does this mean that every user out there, like every advertiser out there, is looking for an advertiser, for a user who stays in the game for 7 days? Is that what the universal KPI means, or?
Yes. So I think most of them are, based on the discussions that we've had with game developers or advertisers and UA managers, most of them are looking at day 7 retention. There are some, let's say, hyper-casual game developers who are also interested in day 3 retention, but I think that day 7 retention is one of the most ubiquitous metrics that are out there, and it's very simple to define. You can calculate day 7 retention for almost any app or any game genre you could think of. And maybe to add a little bit from the kind of machine learning point of view, the day 7 metric is also very well aligned with our human behavior. So a lot of people tend to play games at certain times of the week, for example, during weekends. So if you install a game on Saturday, you might not play the game on day 3 because that's Tuesday and a working day for you. But then you would come back to the game next week if you like that, and you would be counted as day 7 retaining user, even though you're not a day 3 retaining.
That's a good point. Okay, so but basically, got it. Like the trend is, if you're staying in the game, you might also be likely to pay in the game one day. So how does that work? So I believe that like actually paying or like making any money through purchases in the game is the ultimate goal for all advertisers. No?
I think ultimately most advertisers, all advertisers are interested in the revenue generated in their game. So the retention targeting does correlate with, for example, ad revenue or IAP revenue, but we've also brought out the return on ad spend targeting campaigns or ROAS campaigns that are also part of the audience pinpointer product that let advertisers target directly the post-install IAP revenue.
Right. And so basically these are like two different things that they can target and they can correlate. All right, let's think about those advertisers. Who are the advertisers who are looking to buy only purchases? Or let's say, in addition to retaining users, because they will convert into purchases likely, who are looking for mainly purchases, and how do we help those developers?
Yeah, so I think, like I said, the advertisers might have several different UA KPIs that they are optimizing towards. So for some, the just retention might be more relevant at a certain point of the game's lifetime than the return on ad spend. But there are a lot of advertisers there that are pretty sophisticated, and they can have very specific, for example, return on ad spend targets. So what we want to do is we want to give them a tool that they can just basically provide their, let's say, day 7 return on ad spend or ROAS target, and then we will find them users based on that.
Okay, so basically, Unity will find me most paying users, and then is it so that we just charge which advertiser is willing to pay more for these users, and then we just sell it away and that's it? So basically people who cannot pay too much of the paying user can never get those users, or how is that logic?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think there are basically two ways to approach this. One way would be to just target users who we know that are spending money in games and let the advertisers bid for those at very high prices. But we actually haven't gone down that route because we think that we realize that game developers often have also other goals. So, and game developers typically know that you can never have 100% of your users as paying customers. So what we instead do is that we set the CPI, or cost per install bid, to reflect for the ROAS targeting campaigns, to reflect the predicted value of the user, and then and also the advertiser's ROAS target. Does that make sense?
It sounds complicated. It does make sense when we have that information. So
okay. So maybe I can give you a more concrete example. So
please.
Let's say that for this particular user, our neural network says that if this particular user installs game X, they will generate $2 of IAP revenue in that game during the first week.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the UA manager of game X wants to make back, let's say, 10% of the cost that they pay for the user, and they want to make that 10% back during the first week. So that's their ROAS target. So for a user who generates $2 of IAP revenue, to meet the 10% ROAS target, they would need to pay $20, or they would be willing to pay $20 for the installs. Is 10% out of $20 is the $2 that our model predicts the user will create.
Right.
So then we set the CPI bid as $20. Of course, that if we predict that the user will generate $2 of revenue, that's just an average that we expect over a larger number of users. Some users might generate more money, some less than the average. But if you look at it over hundreds or thousands of users, we found that we actually are pretty close to predicting the correct value that the users will bring.
Oh, wow. How much data do you need to make all of this work, though? Like, what is it that you need when you say that, like, you've become pretty good at this? I believe you. I've worked here for a while now. I get that. But how much data, like from a data science perspective, do you actually need?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, like the more data you have, the more accurate models you can create. But from a usability point of view, we want to make the campaigns as easy to run as possible. So we have certain minimum data requirements to make sure that algorithms have some data to provide the initial predictions. Those limits are set fairly low. For example, if an advertiser wants to run a ROAS targeting campaign in a certain country, they need to have at least 10 paying users generated from Unity installs during the past 30 days to be able to set up that ROAS targeting campaign. So that means that typically if you're a new advertiser in our network, or you are starting a campaign in a new country, you would first run a static CPI campaign in that country to see how users from our network perform in your game, and then our model simultaneously learns the same thing. And after, for example, that 10 paying user limit is reached, then you're able to enable the ROAS campaigns and correspondingly for the retention campaigns.
Right. I have to say that I think that 10 has always been so low in my mind. Like, how is it possible that you can make up predictions on who will be similar to these users if you only have 10 depositors, 10 human beings who have made a purchase? But I get it. So, like, just to kind of like emphasize here, this is just to go live, right? So this is literally just to activate day 7 ROAS optimizing campaign in Unity. It should be known that this is a very small data set of 10 users who have made a purchase to actually be immediately accurate, but at least you get to go live, and the more data we have, the more accurate we will be, right?
Yeah. Yes,
okay.
that
That's
is
always
correct.
been one thing for me, that like, hey, wait a minute, 10?
Yeah, I think most advertisers or game developers would also agree that from 10 users, 10 paying users, you don't yet know what your actual return on ad spend is, but it gives you some idea. At least you get an idea, like if the average purchase is more like closer to $2 or $20. So you get the rough ballpark, and then the models learn more as they get more data.
Exactly. Now, but this brings me to the other topic. So even though they get their 10 and they're only going to be like day 7, like Unity is only providing the day 7 optimization factor. But I, as an advertiser, I am doing, my payback window is 180 days. So how should I look at setting my day 7 ROAS target?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a very good question too. I would expect that most advertisers or game developers are very familiar with the LTV curve of their users, or the LTV curve in the game. So let's say that what you're actually interested in is your payback period, and you want that payback period by which you accumulate your initial investment to be 180 days. And you know that to meet that with your LTV curve, you need to reach 10% return on your ad spend by day 7. So in that case, you would take that 10% from your LTV curve and then use that as the ROAS target for our campaigns.
Right. And then you basically, even though it's not going to be met immediately, you kind of like get to know your game, you get to know the users, seasonality comes to play. Maybe sometimes 50 users behave this way in the first 7 days, and then whatever this time of the year happens with this COVID situation, and then the people behave differently. But basically constant learning. And it also means that Unity is constantly learning what the users are doing, right? So it's all in real time. right?
Yep, that is correct. And we are constantly monitoring the return on those ad campaigns that the advertisers are running, so we can also adjust the pricing of the installs based on the past performance of the campaign.
Okay. What is, as a UA manager, what can I do to influence any of this? Like, I guess I can set different targets and different times so that I don't lose money because this time the people are not paying so much. And then I guess I can cap with like my budgets and so on, right?
Yes, that is correct. So some advertisers, when they run retention and ROAS campaigns, some advertisers are happy to just trust the machine learning algorithm to do the best decisions. And some advertisers might have, let's say, a very sophisticated UA operation, or they know, for example, which sources perform best in their games in terms of longer term value or social interaction or something that our models don't necessarily know about. So then they might, for example, want to blacklist or whitelist certain sources in their particular use case and based on their particular experience, even though our algorithms are very good at optimizing just towards the retention and ROAS.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. All right. But now I would like to kind of look at it all from a broader perspective. What gives you the idea of any user doing what you are like aiming towards in a campaign setup? Like what is the kind of inputs that we are using on our end? And like, give me some examples, like real, like actual human being examples.
Yeah. So basically the question that you are asking is what kind of data we feed to our neural network to predict the user's behavior. And I would basically divide that into three categories. One of those is contextual data. The second one is behavioral data. And third one is data related to the advertisers' campaigns.
Okay, I've heard contextual and behavioral so much. Can you just make it really, really clear to me? I have this phone, iPhone 7. I guess it's OS 13. Who knows? Then I am at home, obviously. I'm on Wi-Fi. And I usually like to play mostly casual games or word games. Right? Let's say that I play Homescapes. What is it that I just listed that is kind of behavioral, which is contextual? And I definitely need to get a new phone. Yes.
Yes, thanks, Paivi. So basically, your context or contextual information, or your context means information about your current setting. So, for example, if you're playing Homescapes, that would be contextual information. If you're in the US on an iPhone 7, those are also contextual features. You're using Wi-Fi, your iOS version. Those are all relevant data points for predicting, for example, conversion or retention or purchasing behavior, but they don't really separate you from other US iPhone 7 users. Yeah, so we can only predict that you behave like the average user. So to make the predictions more accurate, we need to do behavioral targeting. So from what you said, the other games that you have been playing besides just Homescapes would be behavioral information. Whether you have spent money on in-app purchase would be another data point.
Spend money.
Yeah. So that's the kind of difference between behavioral and contextual. Contextual is in the now, and behavioral also looks at your past.
And like basically probably like what kind of ads do I like to watch? Like how many seconds like what kind of, like is it a 30-second video that I usually watch? Yeah, because that differentiates from you as a player. Okay. Even though you can have like the same phone, same game, but I am still a different user based on the other inputs. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. What about like game genre? Like, do you like game genre and game type?
Yeah.
Like, do you look at the fact that like, where did I actually even see the ad to start playing Homescapes?
Yes. So that's a good point. So just to add to the kind of previous list I mentioned, we have three categories of information. So one would be the contextual behavioral, the other one would be behavioral, and thirdly, information about the game that we could advertise to you at the ad campaign. So what game we would be advertising, what is its genre, does that match with the genre of other games you have been playing, the campaign creatives, if the video that we could show you is one that converts well for your kind of people or people with your history, and that kind of information.
Okay, and then we use all of these inputs for all of these campaigns. Like basically we went over those three, the static CPI, retention, and ROAS. And now we went over three kind of like the data sets that we are using. And are we using all of it for all of the campaign types?
Yeah. So good clarification. So we don't necessarily use all of the data points for all predictions, because some data is more relevant for predicting some things. For example, the performance of the campaign creative in converting users to install, that's very relevant for conversion prediction. But if we think about how likely you are to spend money in a certain game, it probably doesn't depend on which ad you saw that made you install the game. So
basically like the fact that I like the ad does not mean that I'm going to be the best payer or even the player in the game. So I guess in that sense, that's why we have to have a different price point. That, let's say, advertisers who are looking to increase their DAUs for a particular market, or like a geo or something, then they literally want to pay something for those users who convert. They don't want to pay extra for the purchasers or whatever, because this is not what the current like the goal is, or the second campaign would be a different goal, right? So that's why even though we have this data, we cannot, it doesn't make sense to put all of the data into it, because it's not that relevant, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay, as a UA manager, can I influence this? Can I tell you what data to use, or what can I do here?
Yeah. So it depends, of course, on what you are optimizing towards. So if you are optimizing towards conversion, the campaign video, the campaign creative has a big impact on that. So you can rotate the campaign creatives to make sure that people don't get bored of seeing the same ad over and over again. The retention and ROAS targeting campaigns benefit a lot from having data about the outcomes of especially Unity attributed installs. So you can run a static CPI campaign alongside a retention or ROAS campaign to make sure that the model has enough data to make good predictions, especially if you are ramping up traffic to retention or ROAS campaigns in a new region where you haven't had bought installs from before.
Okay. That makes sense. And like at the end of the day, we also like as UA managers or any advertisers, we like to have the option to have control in things, like the optimizing campaigns at least, or like setting different expectations and goals and so on, and having so-called machines doing the actual hard labor to do the optimization. Okay, that kind of makes sense. So before we kind of like wrapping up this inputs, or like the kind of like the data that we use, how much is the publishing game data still used? I know we touched upon that a little bit before, but like in my mind, UA managers can influence what publishers they're putting the price on, and because this is like the normal practice. So how much are we using data from the publishing game where the ad is being shown?
Yes, so it is a factor, and like we discussed before, that's the kind of contextual feature in the model. So let's say that if you are, I'm very bad at coming up with examples of games since I don't play that much, but I use the Duolingo app to learn
Duolingo,
new languages. Yes, so let's say that if I was on Duolingo and our algorithm was selecting an ad for me, like based on that, let's say that knowledge that I'm on the Duolingo app would be probably relevant for advertising other language-related apps. But if I'm on some other app besides Duolingo, it wouldn't be possible to kind of target me with like language app ads, based on the information what app I am on at that point of time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. I guess like overall, we talked about that before also, that like if an advertiser has like historic information, like long-term years of knowing that this publisher behaves like the users from this publishing game is like this, and you know exactly what you're willing to pay for every single user in that app, go ahead, do that sort of like whitelisting pricing of that publisher. But if you don't know that, then it is better to have the data models actually find those users, because it could be that you would come to be playing Homescapes with me from Duolingo very nicely, but another person from from Duolingo will not do that. But you would be the person who Unity will find that, okay, you might be a very good player for Homescapes. Okay. So that's why I guess basically bottom line, publisher level whitelisting or like kind of like optimization is okay if you have enough data and you know what you would bid for that person, like the publisher. But overall, the like the kind of like the dynamic bidding would be let the data let basically the models do the work of finding those users from different publishers, because the publishing information is not, it's one of the thousands of inputs that we use, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that is correct. And I would maybe like to still add to that the philosophy that we have is that the price that you pay for the user should reflect their value. So for example, in the terms of retention, it might be that if you whitelist certain games, you will get good retaining users from there, but you have limited scale. You might be able to find a little bit less well-retaining users if you expand your horizons to include a whole bunch of other games. But if you can get those users at a lower price point, it might still be, it might still make sense for you.
Yeah, no, that's true. All right. So what is there on the roadmap for this this whole thing?
Okay, let me bring up three things. One of them is related to the ROAS targeting campaigns. I mentioned that we are currently optimizing towards the IAP revenue that users generate in the game. But a lot of game developers and an increasing number of game developers are actually monetizing on ad revenue, especially, for example, hyper-casual games. So we want to bring the ad revenue into that ROAS targeting, and that's on our roadmap for this year. For the
this
retention,
year, that's pretty bold. Okay.
For the retention targeting, if you look at retention, that's okay. That's a good proxy for a lot of things, but that's just looking at one point in the user's lifetime. So what we want to bring is the kind of next step from that, targeting engagement. So not just looking at if they come back on a certain day, but actually, for example, how often they come back, maybe how they interact with your game. So that's also on our roadmap. And then thirdly, what we have been doing all the time for the past years, making better use of user profile data and data about the games to personalize targeting to the individual user. So that's basically three things on our roadmap that I'm very excited about.
This is pretty exciting. I hope we can pull it off and fast. That's of course always my ask as a person who works with advertisers, that basically we want it all immediately. But thank you for explaining all of this. That I think it really cleared up some ideas and like kind of like the logic behind how and what we are doing. And I hope UA managers can also have some takeaways in a way that like there is a reason why we're doing things the way we're doing. Okay, but let me try to summarize. I understand there's like 5 things that basically Unity is doing. So we're focusing on user level targeting, and we are doing that to make sure that the advertiser is paying the right price for the right user. Then we use inputs such as behavioral, contextual, and also the campaign context to help access quality users and bring them to the app that you're wanting to buy users for. Then I think this is something that I keep saying all the time when I ever speak is let data do the work. The more data Unity's algorithm has, the better it is at doing its job. Now, then I think this is the fourth one, that just to summarize what Unity can do to help you in your game is you have set different targets, and this is what we can help you with, is to get scale. You get find users to actually stay in your game, who retain in your game, and find users who pay in your game. And then to end it all with a beautiful, lovely sentence is that constant algorithmic improvements and capabilities are being done by Unity. So the fact that we are here today providing these three options to optimize towards, this is not what we're going to always offer. So I appreciate Jaakko being here today and giving us all this kind of logic behind data models and algorithms and machine learning. Now, thank you for everyone who joined and listened to this here. Be sure to check out Unite Now website, where you can get a lot of sessions on everything Unity related. And also, if you want to understand more about user acquisition offerings, go to unity.com/acquire. Thank you again, Jaakko. This was a pleasure.
Thank you, Paivi. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
That's nice. All right. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.